Well, welcome everyone to another episode of Frame of Reference, Sauk County and beyond. And as if you've been listening lately, you know that we've gone way beyond Sauk County, which when this podcast started, I was trying to talk with leaders in our local communities to talk about subjects as broad as art and education and economic development. So, and in some ways I look at that now and think of it as being a preparation time to talk with guests like the one I have today. I am sitting across from a video screen to someone who is actually in Dubai right now as we record this, which is a wonderful thing that technology has allowed us to do. He is a man that I have come to admire greatly just in the few days that I've had since I found out about him, really, literally. The people that I work with at Command Your Brand suggested that I might have him on as a guest. And the more I read about him, the more I thought, oh my God, why does this man want to take time to talk with me? It's just wonderful. His name is Emmanuel Daniel, and Emmanuel is referred to as a global thought leader. So that's one of the terminology or one of the monikers that has been assigned to him. And I'm intrigued by that alone. But it tells you something about the range of our guests lately. So I am extremely excited, Mr. Daniel, sorry, Emmanuel, I'm just so pleased to have you on the show with me. And thank you so much for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to do that.
No, even before we started, we were already rolling. So let's keep rolling.
Yes, we've been having a talk about everything from the state of China to the monetization of America and the chaos that resides here. So perhaps I'll be able to edit that into something that we can share with people as well. But Emmanuel, as you know, one of the things in my spec sheet, I hope you had a chance to look at it. I like to try to start out with something called My Favorite Things. It is a Gestaltian period of the show where we give people that are listening an opportunity to know something about you as a human, which I think a lot of shows unfortunately don't have a lot of time to do that. But as much as you have expressed already you're interested in getting to know people and hearing from the common folk, if you will, I'm interested in the same thing, and I know our listeners are as well. So without further ado, this is Gestaltian. Wherever it goes. Please try to go with the first thing that comes to the top of your mind. But I will ask, let's start out with something perhaps a little arcane. What is your favorite bird, Emmanuel? You have a favorite bird?
That's a curveball. Favorite bird? More recently, it was penguins, right? Because I finally stepped on the seventh continent, and I took a selfie of myself saying, "This is it. I've reached the seventh continent." And then they make me memorize all the three species of penguins that were on on the Antarctic, so I made some, I took some pains to understand penguins, how they look after their young, how they mate, all of that. So it's not necessarily my favorite bird, but it's the bird that's got my attention for a while. Sure. I grew up in Southeast Asia, and something I learned over time was that how Southeast Asia was actually the transshipment point of birds that migrate from the North Pole to the South Pole 6 months in a year and then do exactly that same journey back the other 6 months in the year. Now, I can't remember the names of some of these birds, but if I looked up a reference book, I'll probably remember them. But I would go to places like Tasmania and stand there and then they would name those birds, and I've seen them in Malaysia before. And these are tiny little birds that make that journey 6 months in a year, and the way in which the different species make those journeys. Some of them are solo; they actually fly alone, and some they fly, on the back of each other's wings. So that's as much as I know about birds.
That's fine. That's well, and penguins are. I'm sure there are people listening right now that love penguins. So you've just ingratiated yourself to penguin lovers. They look like they're wearing tuxedos all the time. Yeah. I mean, how can that not be enjoyable? So, all right. So, and actually, I was thinking, you were born in Kuala Lumpur, right? Am I remembering that? Okay.
Yes, and then I right after college, or rather in for college, I went to Singapore, which is actually right next to Malaysia. These two countries were once one country, and they have a shared history. We were both part of the British colony. My mother cries when the Queen speaks because her father was a high-ranking official during the colonial period. We all learned our English from the British, after
Sure.
colonialism, whoever remained as pastors, as priests, and as teachers. So we share that colonial history. So when I go to a country like the UK, I feel right at home because we learn the same poetry, the nursery rhymes, stuff like that.
Interesting.
And the interesting thing is that today when I tell people I'm from Singapore, because Singapore is 75% ethnic Chinese, and so everybody thinks that Singapore is Chinese. So I always get asked these questions: where are you from originally? And then I tell them I'm from Malaysia, or rather, I was born in Malaysia, and then they say, oh. And then I'm thinking, what did you think Malaysia is? It's actually the same racial compositions as Singapore. In both countries, I'm 10% of the population. My ethnic group. So I'm a minority in both countries, and an important minority because. All of us, the different ethnic groups, contributed to the growth of both of these countries. So today when I meet an American, I will say, "Where are you from?" And he'll tell me, in Ohio, or in Canton, Ohio, or something. And I say, "Where are you from originally?" Because you don't look Native American to me. So I have that identity problem. And what's interesting is that because I grew up with Chinese people as my neighbors in my family, we intermarry quite well and so on. When I went to China in the year 2000 to start my business there, I was very familiar with the Chinese people already. A backstory there, I started a business called the Asian Banker in 1996. After I graduated as a lawyer, but then I spent 10 years trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I thought a publication business is a good way to get to know people, and doing it cross-border gives me an excuse to travel. And I also thought that the banking industry, why the banking industry and not something else? I would have liked to do politics, but politics would have gotten you in jail in many of the countries in Asia at that time. So the next largest industry that pays the bills was banking. And banking was also big enough I call banking a cathedral industry, in that it encompasses all of life, from cradle to grave. When you land in any country, if you met the top bankers, you've practically met everyone who's important. So that's why I ventured into banking. And now it's been 29 years or so, and that gave me an excuse for with the name the Asian Banker. I was able to travel all across Asia, and I would land up in a country, and I would say I'm from the Asian Banker, and they say, "Oh yes, we've heard of the Asian Banker," because the name just sounds so pompous that everybody imagined that they knew that.
Sure.
And in the year 2000. The chairman of the largest bank in China, ICBC, Mr. Jiang Zhangjin, came to Singapore and insisted on having lunch with me. I was running a conference at that time, and I had to take time out to have lunch with him, not realizing that China had at that time made that decision to join the WTO. And to put its largest banks on the global capital market to raise capital, and to build its global framework. And I was one of the people that he took pains to have lunch with me in Singapore. And at that time, I said to him that we had just started our business in Shanghai, and he's Shanghainese. And then he said to me, no, you come to Beijing. You want to be serious about China, you come to Beijing. So because of him, I moved the business from Shanghai to Beijing. And it was a very important decision because the government is in Beijing. And eventually we became the best of friends. He's now retired. We're still good friends. And that started my journey of of meeting a lot of the decision makers in China at a time when they were courting any overseas personality they could find. And what was really nice, a nice story of my own personal career is this. When I went to Japan, Japan wasn't interested in the Asian banker because Japan's banking industry was a post-World War II American creation. If you're not from America, we don't know why you're important to us.
Right.
And I wasn't there in 1945 when Japan was just starting out after having been having needed to be rehabilitated and all that. But I was there when China was starting out in 2000. And if you took a snapshot of the development of the Chinese banking industry, you will see my picture in there because I've had the opportunity to meet a lot of the key people. One of my great stars, over and above Ben Bernanke or Alan Greenspan, is Zhou Xiaochuan, who I thought. The thing about Zhou Xiaochuan is he's a tall man. He's a Northern Chinese. He speaks English perfectly. You can see him at the IMF meeting in the corridor with Ben Bernanke as like a friend. He could carry his weight in Western society as much as in Chinese society, and he oversaw the development of the world's largest country into the market economy. For me, it was like meeting Abraham Lincoln almost. For a man who made such an incredible difference to an entire economy. So there were those moments where I thought that it really was very fulfilling for me. And of course, China is going through its iterations right now. There's a lot of question on the current president Xi Jinping and so on, and I have my views on those. But having that front seat view and having many Chinese officials as personal friends is and if you will notice my book. The foreword was written by former Congressman Barney Frank. So here's the deal with my friendships in the U.S. Right. So someone like Barney Frank, if I was American, I would have to take a number and wait in a queue of the American journalists and people who want to meet him. But because I'm from Asia and Barney Frank wanted to come to Asia and see parts of Asia and invite and accepted our invitation to speak at our conferences and so on, I have him all to myself for 3 weeks. So that's how the friendships with some of the key people in the U.S. developed. Another person who is a very dear friend is Dick Kovacevich, the former chairman of Wells Fargo.
Yeah, I read about him a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have my version of what went wrong with Wells Fargo, and the Wells Fargo that Dick built, because I have very great respect for Dick, but obviously he set in place certain cultural things in the Wells Fargo way of running its business, which should have had more structural checks and balances in the system, which it didn't have. And he was the most heartbroken when Wells Fargo went down. So these are people who are personal to me. And so from a tiny outpost in Southeast Asia, I've had the opportunity to interact with some of the most amazing personalities around the world. And I remember conversations like Sir George Mathewson, who was the chairman of RBS at the time, right after he actually handed it over to his successor, who tried to make that deal with ABN AMRO to buy the retail business of ABN AMRO, and RBS was just growing out of proportion. And here I was in Beijing with George Mathewson, walking down the streets, Financial Street, on a quiet evening, and I asked him this question: how big can a bank become? And he looked at me and he says, "I don't understand this question." He didn't say I didn't understand the question. He just looked at me and he showed it as if he didn't understand the question. And for me, it was like, when you have a successful run as a chairman or a CEO, you do lose perspective, dimension of what's sustainable. And as it turned out, eventually that whole deal unraveled, and his successor was pillared and vilified and so on. So I'm just throwing in the experiences that I've had that given me a front seat view of the future of finance, which is why I'm able to write the book that I did.
Well, I think listening to your answer to that question explains now what a global thought leader is, or how at least a global thought leader becomes a global thought leader. It also explains just how far our conversation can go from the discussion of what your favorite bird is. So we remember that. So, what another favorite? What is your favorite kind of music to listen to?
Glad you asked that, because when I catch on a genre, I tend to stick on it for a while. So until recently, it was Queen. It was Freddie Mercury, all that stuff, right? So
okay. Aerosmith, follow the classics, that kind of thing. So
yeah, and Elton John,
okay.
that genre. But
The Who, maybe The Who. Were you listening to The Who at all? So
right.
Okay, good.
But recently, I listened to someone called Christopher Tin, and man, he's captured my imagination. He actually started life, and that's world music, by the way. So Christopher Tin is a composer come orchestra conductor, right? And he started life. He's from California. After college, his friends who started a gaming platform asked him to write the musical score for a gaming platform. This was in the early 2000s, and he did, and then the first of his songs became very, very successful. I only discovered him recently, and I'm now listening to all his nature songs. You must listen to Christopher Tin. There are two songs especially that are incredibly infectious, meaning that you can listen to it many times in a day. And then there are others which he's now going into, more nature and sustainability themes. And one song is in a Ghanaian, tribal language about the rain. Waloyo o Aloma, something like that. It's and the other one is the Lord's Prayer. Lord's Prayer in Swahili, and man, this man put together, the various cultures and gave it a European symphonic orchestra treatment to carry the music. So now African music is global because of the treatment that he's given it. So now I'm hooked on him. I every time I get a chance, I listen to his music. So I moved from genre to genres. In my youth, I was Karen Carpenter and all that stuff. So I evolved over time.
You need a jazz period if you haven't listened to jazz.
And I have a jazz. Yeah, I'm a big jazz fan too. So
okay.
Yes, that's perpetual.
Okay. So Coltrane, Phil Woods, everyone along that spectrum. Spyro Gyra, even. I mean, that's fine. But all right, easy one and perhaps revealing. Favorite color?
This is a very, very good question. My favorite color is supposed to be red, but everything I wear is blue. Okay, so in my head, my favorite color is red, but in my real life, all my colors. You take me to a store, I'll always pick up the blue shirt. So that's me. Yeah.
So you have a kind of a warring factionalization within your own personality there. No, I'm a red. Oh, no, you're a blue. So
and then when I was in school, very interestingly, I was put in yellow house. I mean, these are sports groups, right? And for all the time I was in high school, in primary school, I never I was never comfortable with that. I mean, I never came to terms with the fact that I was in yellow house. Okay, so I have a big battle in my head about colors on that one.
And yellow and blue combined will make green, and green is a very big part of your life right now. So, in a figurative way, at least. So, I'm not sure, how much of it you're dealing out yourself, but it's certainly you have familiarity with green. Although European, Asiatic currencies are all much different than our green bills here in the U.S.
Right. Yeah.
Do you have a this is I try to kind of finish up with my quick favorites, but this is one that I find I really enjoy hearing people's answers to, and that's, do you have a favorite place that you like to go to, or a favorite thing that you like to do when you need to, or just feel a yearning to do, and even when you need to go to that place and cannot, that if you find something that reminds you of that place, or reminds you of that time, that it centers you again, that it brings a comfort, it brings a sense of, that's who I am, and I find that there are places that people can remember, or times in their lives that they can remember. Their mom baking bread. I mean, there are so many different things there that I'm curious. Do you have a thing like that in your life, or a memory like that?
A memory, and it gets replayed all the time, is that I like cycling towards the mountain. And that's because when I was growing up in Kuala Lumpur is actually in a valley, and it's surrounded by a mountain range. And on one of the mountain range, on the top of it is a casino called Genting Highlands. And it's still there today. But when I was growing up, there were no buildings where I was growing up. It was, in fact, right at the edge of the housing estate in which I lived was a disused tin mine. So it was for miles. It was actually wasteland with grass on it, but it used to be a tin mine. So it was actually clear land. And from there, I would actually go cycling with someone who was my dearest friend to this day. I grew up with him. He's Chinese, ethnic Chinese, but his name is Chu Chongkyong, and we were classmates. We were the same age. So I would take my bicycle from my house, and then I'll cycle to his house, and then we'll call each other out, and then we'll both cycle towards that disused tin mine. And then we would stand at the edge of that and look at the mountain range into the evening until it became dark. And you can see the light of the casino on the top of the mountain. And we will be talking about everything under the sun, about every place we wanted to go. We would be talking geopolitics of the 1970s and so on. And then, now that we're adults, Chu Chongkyong eventually migrated to Canada with his family. So he now lives in Calgary, and I've now been to 111 countries, and these are the things we were talking about as kids. And to this day, even where I live in Singapore, I live in an island, which is on the upper end of the spectrum. But the reason I live there is because it's low density, and I can actually go for huge long walks, like maybe 15 kilometers. I don't know what that is, but and so on. So about 10 miles or something like that, and 10 miles of walking. Give me that anytime. And so I look out for places like this to stay, to live, to meditate. The funny thing is that I am a very gregarious person. When I travel, I always make sure I extend myself to others. I do several things. I make sure I don't wear dark clothes, because I realize that when I wear dark clothes, people find me not easy to relate to, for whatever reason. So I always wear pastel colors when I travel, so that I always
more
smile.
approachable.
And I always make eye contact. So I'm actually gregarious, but I'm also my very own best friend. People don't see this, but my best moments are with myself, and I have no problems with being alone for days. and at the same time being gregarious. So it's something that there's a two sides to me that I totally enjoy. And the the thing about being on your own is that that's where I get my energy. I grew up as a Christian, so a lot of that had to do with being at peace with God and so on. But my idea of God has changed dramatically. I don't think of God as a white man with a beard and with a personality and an attitude and all that. I don't buy that anymore. In fact, the more I understand about the universe and how huge it is and all the issues, all the factors that define it, I like to think of God as a force that we need to be at peace with, and so these moments alone helps me to come to terms with me and the universe. Don't cause trouble, just be at peace with it.
Interesting. Yeah, I can totally concur with your concept of it's an interesting. My walk with God has been much more of an understanding of the broad range of God. That we try to conceptualize him as just a very finite thing, because I think in most minds that's the easiest way to comprehend something of God. And yet, when you think of God being, the creator of everything, and I believe in an intelligent design there as well, that to me is so fascinating, that it's not only that awareness of him as that sort of force, but also the awareness of him in his personal touch upon each of us, which is actually kind of bleeds in to the thought framework of your book that I just started reading, called The Great Transition: The Personalization of Finance is Here. And when I first saw that title and first began to read it, one of the things that touched me right away was your quotes at the beginning of chapters. Are everything from European classics to contemporary Broadway. In that to me always, that's the type of author that I gravitate to, because it tells me something about the broad range of their thoughts, but also gives me a way to grasp right away what the central core of that chapter is going to be.
Yeah.
So and I also thought about, well, personalization. Are we talking about individualism, which right now, frankly, in the U.S., that individualization and collectivization of individuals that all believe the same way, I find very factionalizing, I guess, or very disruptive. And yet, as you pointed out before we even started recording, that disruption in America we should be very used to it by now, because it's our history. The George Floyd event, now I believe as you've even talked about back in the 60s and 70s, it's interesting to me that the LGBTQ plus movement has become much more prevalent as a result, I think, of the George Floyd, situation. Opened up a Pandora's box, if you will, or at least an awareness that, well, hey, wait a minute, it's not just this problem, it's this problem too. And that's very good in a lot of ways, but it's usually not very good when you're in the midst of it. It can be very tumultuous. And it seems to me that that's kind of what you're seeing happening in the banking industry, which is your the primary area that you're exercising your individuality, right? Is to see this thing and try to bring some sense to it through the sense that you're making of it with yourself. And I actually should tell you too, I found it interesting that you were drawn to politics and realized that was something that was perhaps too dangerous to be in, very risk-oriented, at least in China at that point. And yet now you're in banking and finances, which is arguably also a very risk-oriented business. So just they don't put you in jail for it unless, of course, you do horrible things with those finances that people naughty should not be doing. But what led you to that? What happened that brought you? And let's back up too. What is your definition of the personalization of banking that is happening right now? Can you put that into a framework that most people would understand?
Yeah, if you look at the cover of my book, there's a picture of an ice cube. So let's talk about personalization on two fronts, right? One is the personalization of finance. In order to help people understand it, and you don't need to be a finance person to understand it. If you think of ice, it used to be sawn out of the lakes in Michigan, in Boston, put on horse-drawn carriages, sent to New York, where it finds its way into a glass of gin and tonic or something, right? And think about how wasteful that was, and how unproductive it was to transport ice that way. Banking today is exactly that. The money that is in your pocket would have swirled around the world twice, being subject to exchange rate, interest rate, bank charges, security costs, holding costs, and all kinds of things. In other words, you're not at all in control of the value of the money that you carry. Okay. Now, we're now entering a phase because of cryptocurrencies and tokenization that it is already possible. It's a reality that you and I can transact with each other without having an intermediary. We don't need a banking system. We can transact with each other immediately, directly. And not only that, everybody, you, me, anyone, can design and issue our own tokens. And that's something that people don't realize. They think that tokens can only be issued by smart people or financial institutions, something like that. Now, the only thing that's left to do is that if you issue the token, you just want to make sure that people would want to accept it and transact with it and recognize its value. So now, what made the difference with ice? It was a synthetic chemical called chlorofluorocarbon, CFC. And what's going to make the difference in the personalization of finance? So I set out to look for the elements that will personalize finance. The chlorofluorocarbon of finance is what I consider to be identity, value, verification, and data and information. Okay, I mean that's all very technical, but basically, if banking solves these four problems, we can all be able to transact with each other directly. We don't need intermediaries. But the way that the history of economics evolves, there will always be an intermediary. There will always be somebody who wants to make money by being an intermediary of sorts. And he can be an intermediary of the value, of the identity, of the verification process or the data that's being transmitted, and businesses will change. So what happened to the ice merchants? They ended up selling refrigerators, that kind of thing. So now, if we as individuals are capable of transacting more and more directly with each other, then finance doesn't become the defining industry in economics. It becomes an enabling industry that enables people to get to do what they want to do. Nobody wanted a mortgage. People want a home. Nobody wants an automobile loan. People want a sports car, that kind of thing. So now the thing is that there's a huge battle underway where the intermediaries are continuing to try and retain their agency, their role, and the regulators are also afraid of making any transitions because there's a whole range of fraud that's already underway and is it stands in the way and so on, and the regulators owe it to society to moderate the process. So the book is for people in traditional banking and how they are going to make that transition and how they're going to redefine banks as they go through this transition. And the thing is that after I wrote that book, just as it was going to print, I'd given it to a few friends to review it, and one of my dearest friends popped up a book that he had read earlier called The Sovereign Self. Okay, you need to look that up. And The Sovereign Self had the authors, I forget their name now, but they had written a book saying that U.S. as a society was becoming increasingly individualistic. People are being, empowered by access to information and so on, and the individual is becoming important. And I was just going to print that way at that time. So I flipped through the book quite quickly, and I said, is there any overlap or something like that? But we are both parallel books, and so I was intrigued that I was not the only one thinking about the idea of the sovereign self, but from a finance perspective, and they had no finance perspective in the book at all. Now, the idea of individualism and individuality, I'm not sure what the phrase should be in society. Now, I've dealt with it as a financial concept in banking. Just one other point is this: whenever I say the personalization of finance, every banker imagines he understands what it means. He thinks that personalization of finance is providing such a personalized service to the customer that he will love your bank for it. Where you can package a mortgage and put it in a ribbon-bound wrapping and give it to him as a gift, and he will think that the bank loves me very much.
In red, you'd give it to a red box for you.
And
so.
red box, so bankers need to be taught that personalization means you don't exist anymore. You're not part of the story anymore. You're irrelevant.
That's point.
And so that's one misconception that I have to keep explaining to traditional bankers who, the moment you say the personalization of finance, they imagine they understand that. But there's another personalization that is so important and so fundamental. And actually, this is the subject of my next book, which I called, which I've entitled tentatively the Winning Civilization, about countries that define the future and societies that define the future. So the theory I have is this: that when civilization post Bronze Age, Bronze Age ended about 1170 BC, and then we moved into the Roman Empire period and so on. As long as civilization was predicated in the Mediterranean region, it was incredibly communal. The Jewish culture was communal. The Egyptians were communal. The Greeks were communal. And the Roman society was originally very communal and so on. But the more north it moved, when it moved to Germany, and then further up north, Northern Europe, it became increasingly personalized. There were the Calvinists who preached or taught that religion is a personal relationship with God, and then there was Martin Luther, who put that 99 thesis on the door, saying that that the church, that the religion again is a personal relationship with God. That the church shouldn't be claiming fees and stuff. All that. And then it went up north. And by the time it reached north, the Scandinavian countries and also the Netherlands and so on, it had reached a high level of personalization. And the Protestant movement emphasized a personalized religion. And the English exported it globally. And I call the Americans like the descendants of the personalization of religion, and in the period of the Calvinists, the idea of personalization is personal accountability. But by the time it reaches the US, where it is today, it's actually personal gratification. So you've seen how the personalization of society, of the individual, had evolved over time, and into what America is today. And America is like the last child of that journey, and America is exporting a form of personalization which is actually predicated on gratification and consumption rather than personal responsibility. And that coupled with information, where information it empowers the individual even more to be even more personalized. And if you then add the personalization of finance, where you don't need intermediaries and institutions, that people increasingly deal directly with each other, you actually have society that is evolving so dramatically that it really needs new institutions and new structures to hold it together. The existing structure just doesn't carry society. And I think that's where we are today.
Well, that opens up to me, in just a miasma, I guess, of potential issues. One of which is just the responsibility. You touched on that. In America, we're very adamant about our rights. I have a right to this. I have a right to that. I have a right to free speech. I have a right to own my own guns. And where we seem to always miss the boat, in my mind, is, but with each of those rights comes a responsibility. With the right to represent people, as our Congress is right now, legislature is representing us right now in the potential default on our debt. It strikes me that one of the things they are forgetting or trying to use as a bargaining card is their right to insist on their agenda, and without recognizing and really saying, but we're also responsible for the financial well-being of our people and our economy and the world's economy. So to behave so irresponsibly is just an abysmal way of being. So the personalization appeals to me from the standpoint of perhaps, just perhaps, we can take away some of that power to cause chaos and to enlist people in the fear of the day club. Instead of that, we can choose to say, whoa, wait a minute, children, let's behave for a moment here. Let's stop the smoke and mirrors and let's just try to deal with things. The other point that strikes me is, as you talk about this personalization, do you see, I wonder, the existing structures, the existing banking culture and structure, financial structures that are in place, just as the oil industry is resistant to renewable energy sources, how do you see the resistance of the existing banking structures, financial structures, resisting to this personalization? Because certainly they have a lot to lose. The power brokers within that culture have a ton to lose. So, and they have the power. One of the things that I've always worried about with cryptocurrencies, for example, is that the people behind the scenes, they can say, oh, that's very nice. Play with that, people. That's just fine. You go ahead and play with your cryptocurrency but they're really pulling the strings on it all. Is there a best strategy for that transition, or are we going to have to just make it up as we go along?
The U.S. is a laggard in the very technologies that it had created itself. Okay, if you want to see the future of finance, you need to go to Africa, where the payments industry has now been revolutionized by any number of technology companies that are able to transact money across borders, across several borders in Africa, on the back of a text message. Now, just think about this. If money is information, and if information can be transmitted for free, money can be transmitted for free, right? So the technology exists for you and I to transact with each other on the back of a WhatsApp message, okay? So the only reason we're not doing it is because WhatsApp itself doesn't want to provide that infrastructure because it's afraid of getting into, regulatory problems in several countries. But there are WhatsApp payments initiatives in India and Brazil already. Okay, so the innovations are taking place outside of the US. China started off by putting payments on its super apps, and then India went on to create identities from which you can make payments to anybody and on any platform. So it's a little bit different from the Chinese model. And today in the US, the Fed is about to introduce something called Fed Now, which is an instant payment infrastructure. And the distractions that I'm reading about, people are claiming that Fed now is a precursor to the CBDC in the US, which is totally not true. It's very interesting. That the pushback, the theories and stuff like that. The conspiracy theories and all that, and to think that the U.S. is the last country to introduce the instant payment. The UK was one of the first. We have that in many Southeast Asian countries now, South Africa, and so on. So,
and PayPal has been there all along, and yet that didn't quite get there, did it? So
yeah, and the back end of PayPal is still the credit card industry, and it's still the bank industry, right? So the US is okay with building something that looks like an innovation when actually under the carpet it's still the same old thing, and being the pioneer. That means that credit cards were invented in 1967 or something like that, with Visa and Diners Card and so on.
Bank Americard,
Bank Americard. And so on, and then they put the technology behind it. During that period, the U.S. was a leader, but from that period, they built incredible layers of dependence on the program and beneficiaries that they can't dismantle it, right? So the story I use as an allegory is that of the Kodak. In 1995, Kodak invented digital film together with some of the research organizations in California, and Kodak was the last to make that transition to digital film. And right into the 2000s, you would still see advertisements for the 35mm film. 2001, Sony introduced Cybershot, the digital camera. 2007, the iPhone was invented. And 2010, Kodak went into liquidation and bankruptcy, right? So now, is it possible for banks to go through the same experience? Now, that's what I say in my book. Somewhere towards the end, I said, if the product doesn't change, nothing changes. And that's my clarion call to the banking industry, that you can talk about innovation for all you want, but you're actually just circling around your own navel. But if the product doesn't change, nothing changes. Now, when I came up with the Kodak story, that was 2017, and then I spent a few years thinking, what is the most beloved of the banking industry's product? And I couldn't see it for a while. It was right in front of me, the deposit business. And I finally wrote it down in my book. I said that, the business that you need to unravel is the deposit business. And when I wrote it, I was really afraid, because I thought that, bankers would think I'm dumb or an idiot, because I also come from the banking industry, and I know that the best run banks are the ones that are able to gather deposits in the cheapest possible form, because that gives them the margins in order to lend, and also the customer base who are secure and all that. And some of the best deposit story banks in the US. There was Vernon Hill, someone who ran a bank called Commerce Bank Corp. With the best story on the deposit business I could think of. But then I could see that the deposit business was being digitized. That the digital wallet players were just as important as traditional banks in the deposit business. And the name of the game was changing from net interest margin to utility. In other words, I would trust an institution to carry my deposits if I can use it effectively, if I can use it to pay, if I can pay people instantly, and increasingly paying into digital platforms, including gaming and all that. And the digital wallet business is growing dramatically, and I can see that transition going into digital tokens eventually. And so I've made an assertion in my book and even now in this conversation that it's not inconceivable that we will come to a point that when banks will be the biggest issuers of stable coins going forward. Okay? Now, the reason I come up with these lines of thinking is that I think through the transitions, and I think through the logical flows, and then I come to the conclusion that, you know what, this is where it's heading. Um, and as a futurist, what I do with that is I test every current development against the theory that I've set out for myself. If it varies or if there's an aberration, then if I'm wrong, I'm willing to accept it. And I'm saying, okay, I'm wrong, I'll stand corrected. But as long as I haven't been, countered, I don't need to listen to all the noise that happens in the industry. Today, there's so much noise in the US that you cannot figure out where this is going. But if you have come to a conclusion that this is where it's probably heading, you reduce the amount of noise that you need to pay attention to. So like the SEC make grandstanding on cryptocurrencies and the Fed issuing papers and so on. I go back into US history to see how the US eventually makes policy. And then I come to this dramatic realization that the US never had a financial policy. It always had it in reaction to something. The reason Bretton Woods happened in the first place was to solve some of the problems post-war Europe. The reason the Bretton Woods agreement unraveled in 1971 was because the U.S. just couldn't hold on to the price of gold, and then floated its currency. Despite all of the U.S. Most important economists, and including Keynes and some of the others, including Mises, by the way, were adherents to the gold standard, and yet there comes a point where the U.S. just walks away from it, and just extrapolate it into everything else. The reason the dollar is the world's reserve currency is not because there was a white paper from the Fed saying that we want to make this a global currency. It's precisely because the U.S. didn't care what happened to the dollar outside of the U.S. In fact, it didn't even want it to come back. Today, if you came back from somewhere back into the U.S., the first question they ask you is whether you are carrying $10,000 or more. And this is from the 1970s, where there were restrictions on bringing capital back into the U.S. Right? So, so
the point being that we've always been adapting, and do you see the banking industry continuing to adapt or becoming the ice company of the future? Is that are those the prognoses?
So what I see the banking industry doing is resisting as far as it can until it cannot. It's why,
because there's more money to be made and not resisting ultimately, which would make sense.
Yeah. And the thing is that sometimes when we talk about the banking industry, we think of it as a giant. It's like the biggest building in town or something. It no longer is. The largest bank in the world, the Chinese bank ICBC or even JP Morgan, they're like $2 trillion in size, $3 trillion in size. There are fund managers now, BlackRock, for example, which is like $10 trillion in size, $11 trillion in size, $6 to $7 trillion in managed funds, and then there's discretionary funds. So there are industries, the corporate lending business, the commercial banking paper business is larger than bank lending, even in the US. So banking is just one of several financial intermediaries in the financial infrastructure. And it's shrinking. It's like the horse-drawn carriage. What I like very much is a photograph of New York in 1901. There was like, if you pull up pictures of New York Street in 1901, you would see 200 carriages, horse-drawn carriages, and one motor vehicle. Okay, the motor vehicle is a huge nuisance to the street because it's heavy, it's noisy, it damages the street, it startles the horses, it's slow, and it's cumbersome and all that.
My mom used to talk about being a kid in Marinette, Wisconsin, and a car would come down the street when the kids were playing in it, and the kids would chase after the car going, "Get a horse!" So
Get a horse.
I thought, things are always the same, aren't they? So we ridicule the new thing in town. So
and just in 3 years, by 1903, it was just the opposite. It was like 20 cars and 3 or 4 horse-drawn carriages. And in the early years of the automobile vehicle in New York, all the rules were stacked up against the automobile. It wasn't stacked against the horse carriages. Which streets you can drive on, how much noise you can make, all that.
Or you could buy gas. You had to go to drugstores to buy gas because it was a cosmetic product, right? So, yeah.
And by the year 1920, there were about 2,000 automobile manufacturers in the U.S. 2,000. It wasn't just Ford and GM. That's how they consolidated eventually into the 1990s, and it became only several players. So the same type of evolution will take place in finance, where right now the rules are stacked up against the new innovations coming in, and then they'll become faster, quieter, more convenient and easier to use and cheaper. And the rules will just not, make sense anymore. And then you'll see the incumbents crumbling.
Well, I think you touched on it even in our pre-discussion about America is quite good at adapting or dying. And we have transmitted that thinking, which I honestly believe it's part of the melting pot of America, is that we have so many. My daughter is big on talking about the difference in multiculturalism, the European model of what that looks like versus the American model of that. And they're very different. Our multiculturalism is more a function of the melting pot attitude, whereas in the European model, it appears to be more of allowing each of the factions to exist with integrity and respect. And but there's not as much mixing in of the melding of the things together. Emmanuel, we have so much more to talk about, and I am at a hard stop myself, unfortunately. I hope we can somehow figure out a way to continue our conversation in the future, because I suspect it will be like Jon Stewart's show, where he consistently brings in the same experts regularly to just kind of continue the conversation, because I would just be fascinated to do that. I hope you would feel it would be worth your time as well. Is that possible?
Well, I mean, this first conversation is us gelling with each other. I also feel like we have not even started, and we could have gone in many different directions. So I want to say thank you for giving me the chance to lay out the first principles of how I think, and then let's build on this conversation. And it's a two-way street, because sometimes when I throw out an idea, you remember a metaphor, an experience that you've had, and that enriches me as well. So I really appreciate the conversation.
Excellent. Well, I feel the same way. I have that warm, tingly feeling inside that says, here is a lifelong learner that we can share a journey together with, and that would be wonderful. Folks, my guest today has been Emmanuel Daniel, who has two first names, Emmanuel. That's very difficult. I don't know what Emmanuel Daniel. I guess we can be right either way, right?
I can tell you passport stories at immigration counters. Anyway.
Very good. Especially a very suspicious import agent would be, well, what is going on here? Which are you? So, but Emmanuel is the author of a wonderful book called The Great Translation of Transition of Personalization of Finance is Here, which I find a fascinating title in and of itself, that it's saying, guys, it's here, learn about it. And before we talk again, I will do everything I can to finish the book, because I suspect that will give us at least 100 years worth of conversation to have. So as the questions come to mind, and I take notes, and I did write down both The Sovereign Self and Christopher Kidd, so I'll be able to speak intelligently about those two subjects as well.
That's
wonderful. Thank you so much, Emmanuel.
You gave me some thoughts. I'm going to put that up on my blog, emmanueldaniel.com. Happy to build on what we've talked about today.
Excellent. Well, and I can send you a copy of today's interview as well. So if you want to share that with people, please do.
Absolutely.
I think our conversation is something that I hope will encourage other people, if not make them laugh a bit here and there. Especially our talk about penguins. So,
we started that way, yeah.
All right, sir. Take care, folks. Thanks for tuning in this week to Frame of Reference. And please join us again next week with who knows where the conversation will go from that conversation. But know that we will come back to this one sometime, hopefully in the near future. Take care.